The birthday cake, a three-tiered vanilla bean monstrosity, sat like a forgotten monument on the vast marble island in the kitchen. 23 candles, a vibrant rainbow against the pristine white frosting, were slowly surrendering to gravity, their wax weeping in colorful rivulets. It was my cake for my 23rd birthday. A fact apparently lost on everyone else as the only sounds were those of celebration for another. Victoria, darling, that photographer from Milan just adored you. Mom's voice, high and effervescent, floated from the dining room where my sister was undoubtedly holding court. He said, and I quote, "She has the indefinable it factor, Mrs. Chen, a true muse. He simply has to shoot your next campaign. Imagine, Milan. He even suggested a spread in Vogue Italia." I leaned against the cool stone of the doorframe, a familiar ache already blooming in my chest. "That sounds rather expensive, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but clear enough to carry. "Especially with his notorious day rates. Are we absolutely certain the ROI justifies it this quarter, given the sensitivities?" Mom finally glanced towards me, a brief, distracted flicker of her eyes before they returned to her phone, presumably live streaming Victoria's magnificence. "Oh, Maya, don't be such a gloomy Gus. Your father assured me the Q3 projections are looking splendid. Victoria's image is an investment, sweetie. Good for her, good for Chen Global." She waved a dismissive hand. "Now, Vicky, tilt your head just a little to the left. Yes, perfect." The cloying sweetness of vanilla and melting wax warred with the cloud of Victoria's signature scent. Fleur Eternelle, a perfume rumored to cost more than my entire semester's tuition. She was, as always, a vision of curated perfection in cream silk, striking an artful pose as Mom documented her every angle for the adoring masses online. "Mother, are you sure this angle is flattering?" Victoria instructed, her voice a silken command that brooked no argument. "My left side is my power side, you know that, and for heaven's sake, please use the Paris filter, not Lark. Lark makes me look positively ghastly, and we're aiming for aspirational, not anemic chic." "Of course, Pumpkin," Mom cooed, her fingers tapping furiously. "Anything for my shining star. Oh, this one is simply divine. Hashtag hash globalicon, hashtag hash Chen dynasty, hashtag hash proud mama." Victoria offered a tight, professional smile. "Keep it subtle, Mother. Effortless chic, remember? We don't want to look like we're actually trying too hard." Her gaze then drifted, snagging on my reflection in a polished silver serving tray. A delicate eyebrow arched in feigned surprise. "Oh, Maya. Still lurking in the shadows? I almost didn't see you there. Shouldn't you be, I don't know, off cataloging rare ferns or something equally riveting?" "Actually, Victoria," I said, stepping further into the opulent dining room, my voice surprisingly steady, a new firmness lacing it. "I was just admiring your performance. You really have the posing for imaginary accolades while the real world crumbles routine down to an art form." Victoria's smile faltered for a microsecond, her perfectly mascaraed eyes narrowing fractionally. "Is that supposed to be one of your cryptic little jokes, sister?" Because frankly, it wasn't very funny. Unlike my career, which, by the way, helps keep this entire family swaddled in the style to which we're all rather comfortably accustomed, including you. "Oh, I'm acutely aware of your many contributions," I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That familiar hollow ache intensified, spreading like ice through my veins, a chilling echo from a past I alone remembered. This was it, the casual cruelty, the constant, grinding belittlement that had defined my first existence. The one that saw me finally give up the ghost at 35, utterly alone, in a sterile hospital room, unmourned, forgotten. "It must be utterly exhausting," I added, meeting her gaze, "being so indispensably vital." Mom, ever vigilant against any disruption to Victoria's serenity, bustled in, her expression one of forced brightness. Now, girls, no bickering today of all days. Maya, darling, Victoria has had a very long, very demanding day of being fabulous. Let's all just try to be supportive, shall we?" She patted my arm vaguely, her touch fleeting. "Why don't you go find your father? I think he wanted to discuss Something or other, with you later. A blatant, tired lie, I was sure. He hadn't willingly sought me out for a meaningful discussion in years. The ancient grandfather clock in the hall chimed 6 heavy, sonorous tolls, each one a hammer blow against my resolve. 18 hours. The countdown had seared itself into my brain. Tonight, at an emergency board meeting called with little notice, Richard Chen, my father, would anoint his successor to the Chen global empire. And the chosen one, of course, would be Victoria. The golden child, the one whose manufactured radiance supposedly blinded everyone to the deep, systemic cracks forming in the very foundations of our family's corporate legacy. Victoria simply shines, Richard, don't you agree? I'd overheard Mom say to Dad in his mahogany-paneled study earlier that afternoon, her voice practically shimmering with undiluted pride. That dreadful reporter from Forbes was utterly captivated. She actually called Victoria the most compelling and dynamic young executive she's met in years. Dad's deeper voice had rumbled in complacent agreement. She has the presence, Eleanor, the innate drive. She's a natural leader. The markets will adore her. And, he'd added with a dismissive chuckle, the impressive Q3 figures will make any lingering, pesky doubts entirely irrelevant. 18 hours. 18 hours before they attempted to formally sign away my birthright, my future for the second time in 2 lifetimes. They had no earthly idea what was bearing down on them. They still saw Maya, the quiet one, the insignificant afterthought. They were about to meet someone entirely, terrifyingly new. I excused myself with a thin, brittle smile, leaving them to their cocoon of mutual adoration and blissful ignorance. Back in the cavernous kitchen, the forgotten birthday cake was a truly sorry sight. Its once proud candles now melted into a psychedelic, congealing mess across the vanilla landscape. Right, I said softly, addressing the ruined confection, a strange sense of calm settling over me. New plan. Scraps, I decided, were definitely off the menu this time around. For 35 years in one life and 23 agonizing years in this one, I had practically starved for a single genuine morsel of their attention, their approval. That Maya was gone, having effectively died from emotional and spiritual malnutrition. This Maya? She was about to give them a masterclass in hostile takeovers, starting with her own damn life. They want a show? I murmured, pulling out my phone, the screen lighting up my face, reflecting a steely glint in my eyes I barely recognized as my own. A real family spectacle? Oh, you'll get one. It'll be a command performance, darlings. My thumb hovered over a name in my contacts, a name that represented the first tangible step. Marcus Webb. This time, dearest sister, I whispered to the empty room, the spotlight finds me. The decision, once a fragile hope, now solidified, hard and sharp as a diamond in my chest. This was the first true decisive action, the unshakable, irrevocable internal commitment to burn their gilded cage to the ground. My fingers, surprisingly steady, flew across my phone's screen, pulling up a number I'd committed to memory across 2 lifetimes. Marcus Webb, our family lawyer, old as dust but sharp as a tack, and the keeper of more Chen secrets than anyone else alive. The last time I'd thought of calling him with such urgency, I was already fading, too weak to even lift the receiver. Not this time. I pressed dial before doubt could seep in. His receptionist, a brisk woman named Carol, answered on the second ring. Marcus Webb's office, Carol speaking. Carol, it's Maya Chen, I said, my voice even, betraying none of the seismic shifts happening within me. I need an emergency meeting with Marcus, today if possible. It's regarding my grandfather's trust, specifically the covenants pertaining to my inheritance and my board seat. There was a slight pause. Miss Chen, Maya, is everything all right? Carol's professionalism wavered for a moment. She knew me as the quiet one, the wallpaper daughter. Everything is finally about to be, Carol, I replied. Please tell him I'm invoking the Phoenix Clause, his little nickname for it. He'll understand. Another pause, longer this time. Then, Marcus himself was on the line, his voice a gravelly baritone I knew so well. Maya, my dear girl, Carol said something about the Phoenix Clause. Are you quite certain you understand what you're proposing? That's not a firecracker, it's a tactical nuclear device. The fallout. Marcus, I cut in gently but firmly. I've never been more certain of anything in my entire existence, or my previous one for that matter. The time for caution is over. The time for action is now. How soon can you have the preliminary paperwork drawn up and ready for us to discuss my immediate instatement? He sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Given the implications you're hinting at, and the unorthodox nature of your foreknowledge, I suppose I can clear my afternoon. 2 o'clock, my office. And Maya? Yes, Marcus. Come prepared for a storm, you're about to unleash one. Don't worry, Marcus, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. I am the storm. I ended the call, the click of the phone feeling like the first shot fired in a revolution only I knew had begun. The air in the kitchen, still thick with the scent of forgotten cake and Victoria's expensive perfume, suddenly felt charged, electric. It was done. The first real, irreversible step. Steeling myself, I walked back towards the dining room, where the laughter and chatter had reached a crescendo. Victoria was now dramatically recounting her harrowing experience of a slightly delayed first-class flight, while Mom and a few distant aunts hung on her every word. Dad, Richard Chen, stood beaming by the fireplace, a glass of champagne in hand, looking every bit the proud patriarch of a flawless dynasty. I approached him directly, my shadow falling over the edge of the Persian rug. Dad, I began, my voice cutting through Victoria's monologue, just enough to make her pause, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. I need to speak with you. It's urgent, and it concerns the board meeting you've scheduled for tonight. He turned, a genial but distracted smile on his face. Maya, sweetheart, not now, can't you see? He gestured vaguely with his champagne flute towards Victoria, who had resumed her story with renewed vigor. Your sister has just received word she's landed the cover of Vogue Paris. We're in the middle of celebrating a truly significant achievement here. Whatever it is, I'm sure it can wait until tomorrow, can't it? Or better yet, run it by your mother. Mom, ever his echo in matters of brushing me aside, chimed in without missing a beat, her tone one of mild exasperation. Yes, Maya, honestly. Your timing is atrocious as usual. Don't be such a spoil sport. Let your sister have her well-deserved moment in the sun. We rarely get good news like this. It's not every day your daughter becomes an international icon, Dad added, puffing his chest slightly. The casual dismissal, the way they spoke as if I were a mildly inconvenient piece of furniture, pricked at old wounds, but the new resolve held firm. I was no longer a piece of furniture. I was a wrecking ball. Actually, Dad, I stated, my voice clear and carrying a new, unfamiliar weight that made even Victoria's theatrical sigh catch in her throat. The ambient chatter in the room seemed to dim. I don't think it can wait, and with all due respect to Victoria's Vogue cover, I believe you'll want to hear this before you make any grand, irrevocable announcements at tonight's board meeting. I let the silence stretch for a beat, savoring the slight furrow that appeared on my father's brow, the first crack in his complacent facade. I'm invoking the primary terms of Grandpa Chen's original trust agreement. As of this moment, I am claiming my full inheritance rights, effective immediately. A gasp rippled through the small gathering of relatives. Mom's hand flew to her pearls. Victoria simply stared, her mouth agape. And, I continued, my gaze unwavering as I met my father's astonished eyes, that inheritance specifically includes his designated non-transferable board position, which, as you know, has remained vacant. So, yes, Dad, I'll be attending tonight's meeting. Not as a guest, not as a silent observer, but as a fully vested voting member of the board of Chen Global. I trust you'll have an extra chair arranged. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick sounding like a countdown to an explosion. Dad's face, moments before wreathed in smiles, had paled considerably. He opened his mouth, then closed it, for once rendered speechless. Mom looked like she might faint. Victoria, however, recovered first, her shock morphing into a sneer of utter disbelief. You? She scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain as she pushed herself forward. A board member? Don't be ridiculous, Maya. What could you possibly know about the complexities of high finance or corporate strategy? You probably think E-Bit Day is a new K-pop band. A few of her sycophantic friends tittered nervously. Dad finally found his voice, a low growl of controlled fury. Maya, this is hardly the time for childish games or some sort of bizarre attention-seeking fantasy. What on earth are you prattling on about? Your grandfather's trust is exceptionally complex, and its terms are not for you to meddle with or wave around like a toy. Oh, I think I understand its complexities perfectly, Dad, I replied, my tone cool and measured, a stark contrast to the rising color in his cheeks. Just as I understand the company's current, shall we say, rather delicate liquidity challenge. I let my gaze sweep over their stunned, disbelieving faces before landing back on my father. For instance, that rather inconvenient $50 million black hole currently residing in the Chen Global R&D subsidiary, the one being so discreetly serviced by those rather precarious off-balance sheet loans, the ones that are, most unfortunately for all of us, about to come due next fiscal quarter? The blood drained from Dad's face, leaving it a ghastly gray. Even Victoria looked momentarily stunned into silence. Information that typically only the most senior executives and the designated heir apparent would be privy to. I continued, pressing my advantage, the words falling like chips of ice into the superheated silence. Or, of course, I added, allowing a faint, chilling smile to touch my lips, someone who perhaps spent a previous lifetime watching this very company slowly, painfully bleed out from that exact mismanaged wound. Someone who knows precisely where all the financial bodies are buried because she watched them being interred. The final cryptic statement hung in the air, a veiled threat and an undeniable assertion of knowledge they couldn't fathom, yet couldn't ignore. The room was utterly, terrifyingly silent. The celebration was definitively over. The hum of the fluorescent lights in Marcus Webb's downtown law office was a dull, incessant buzz, a stark counterpoint to the hushed, golden warmth I'd left behind at our family mansion. Here, everything was sharp angles, cool glass, polished steel, and the faint, dry scent of old paper mingling with Marcus's expensive, understated cologne. It was a room built for uncomfortable truths and hard bargains, not for familial warmth. Marcus, looking more like a wizened, incredibly shrewd owl than ever in his perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, spread a series of thick, creamy vellum contracts across the vast, reflective expanse of his mahogany desk. Each document seemed to thrum with a latent power. Maya, he began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that commanded attention. These are the primary declarations from your grandfather's meticulously crafted estate. Specifically this one. He tapped a document edged in faded blue ribbon with a perfectly manicured nail. Is the codicil pertaining to what he rather dramatically termed the Phoenix contingency? It's ironclad, my dear. Absolutely, unequivocally ironclad. He peered at me over the top of his gold-rimmed half-moon spectacles. Your grandfather, Jonathan Chen, possessed, well, let's just say he had remarkable, if sometimes rather unsettling, foresight into human nature, especially the nature of his own kin. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. He knew they'd try to write me out, didn't he, Marcus? He knew Dad would sideline me for Victoria. Marcus offered a grim, almost imperceptible smile. Jonathan knew Richard often valued perception over substance, and that your sister, Victoria? Well, Victoria is, and always has been Victoria. He wanted to ensure the true, enduring legacy of Chen Global was protected by proven competence and genuine commitment, not just by a convenient name or a charming facade. He gestured to a chair. Sit, Maya. We have much to discuss before your father and sister inevitably arrive, and they will arrive. He was right. The calm before the storm was officially over. As if summoned by Marcus's pronouncement, the heavy, frosted glass door to the outer office burst open with such force that it shuddered against its frame. Victoria stormed in first, her stiletto heels clicking an angry tattoo against the polished marble floor of the reception area, a sound that amplified her fury. Dad followed close behind, his face a mask of controlled indignation, though the tick in his jaw betrayed his mounting agitation. There you are, you conniving little snake! Victoria spat, her voice shrill and vibrating with rage as she skidded to a halt before Marcus's desk, her expensive silk blouse practically crackling with static electricity. What is the absolute meaning of this ridiculous HRD charade? How dare you try to pull a stunt like this on the very day of my triumph, upsetting everyone and playing these insidious little games with our family's legacy, our reputation? Dad stepped forward, placing a hand on Victoria's trembling shoulder, though it seemed more a gesture of solidarity than restraint. Maya, Marcus telephoned me, he said, his voice tight with a barely suppressed parental thunder. This is outrageous. Utterly, completely outrageous. You cannot possibly comprehend the gravity of what you're attempting to do, the damage you could inflict. This isn't some childish prank. Marcus, unperturbed, simply raised an eyebrow. Richard, Victoria, good of you to join us. Maya was just about to review the pertinent clauses your father, Jonathan, put in place precisely for a situation such as this. Please, have a seat or don't. But Maya is my client in this matter, and she has my full attention. The implicit dismissal in his tone was a masterpiece of legal froideur. Victoria ignored Marcus, her furious gaze fixed solely on me. Her chest heaved, and her perfectly manicured hands were balled into fists at her sides. The scent of her perfume, usually so alluring, now seemed acrid and overwhelming in the confined space. Do you seriously, honestly think? She hissed, stepping closer to me, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that was somehow more threatening than her earlier shriek. That you can just waltz in here after years, decades, of doing absolutely nothing, of being a complete and utter non-entity, a ghost in your own family, and try to claim what's mine? What I've worked tirelessly for, what I've built. Her accusation, so laden with self-righteous delusion, almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, a cold, clear anger solidified within me, burning away the last vestiges of the timid girl I once was. The years of being overlooked, of being dismissed, of being the lesser child, coalesced into a single point of unyielding resolve. This was not just about a company anymore. It was about reclaiming a life, 2 lives, that had been stolen by their ambition and neglect. I met her fiery gaze with a calmness that seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst could have. "What's yours, Victoria?" I queried, my voice even, almost conversational, yet carrying an edge of steel. That's a truly fascinating interpretation of events. Last I checked the birth certificates. A rather immutable set of documents, I believe. I am the eldest daughter of Richard Chen. I paused, letting my eyes flick briefly to my father, who looked increasingly uncomfortable, then back to Victoria. And according to Grandpa Chen's will, the actual comprehensive last will and testament, not the conveniently abridged summary Dad prefers to circulate, we possess equal inheritance rights to his personal estate and foundational shares in Chen Global. Or did that rather crucial part somehow slip your mind amidst all your tireless work and building? Dad cleared his throat. Maya, that's an oversimplification. There are nuances, conditions your grandfather stipulated. Oh, I'm counting on those conditions, Dad, I said sweetly, especially the ones about capability and sound judgment. Victoria's laugh was sharp and brittle like shattering glass. Equal? Don't make me retch. Rights. What rights have you possibly earned, Maya? You've never contributed a single worthwhile thing to this family or to the business in your entire pampered, pathetic life. She gestured wildly around Marcus's opulent office. While I've been out there, day after day, year after year, building the Chen brand, attending those mind-numbing charity galas, charming ruthless investors, becoming the public face of our success, what precisely have you been doing, little sister? Hiding in your room with your dusty old books and your pathetic little anxieties? Fantasizing about a life you're too scared to actually live? Her words were meant to sting, to diminish me, to remind me of my place as the family shadow. And perhaps in my past life they would have. They had. But the Maya standing before her now was forged in the fires of a deathbed regret and an impossible second chance. The old wounds were there, but they were scars now, not open sores. Actually, I said, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips, I do enjoy a good book, Victoria. They're quite informative. Far more so than your curated Instagram feed, I'd imagine. Hiding? I let out that short, humorless laugh then, the sound surprisingly robust in the tense silence of the office. No, Victoria, I haven't been hiding. Not anymore. I've been observing, learning, paying extraordinarily close attention to all the tedious little details you and Dad consistently find so beneath your notice. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial calm that seemed to visibly unnerve her far more than any shouting match would have. For instance, I continued, my gaze flicking between her and my increasingly ashen-faced father. Unlike you, I actually understand this company's financials. Not the glossy, sanitized versions you feed to the press and the more gullible board members, but the real, gritty, often terrifying numbers buried deep within the consolidated ledgers and subsidiary reports. I paused, allowing the full weight of my assertion to sink in. Victoria's arrogant smirk faltered, a tiny crack appearing in her polished facade. Dad shifted his weight, avoiding my eyes. I understand things like, oh, for example, I pressed on, my voice deliberately devoid of emotion. The 50 million United States dollars in carefully concealed, systematically obfuscated operational losses stemming from those disastrously managed innovative global tech ventures you so passionately championed and personally oversaw for the last 2 fiscal years. Catastrophic losses, I might add, which you've been desperately and rather clumsily, I must say, trying to paper over with your wildly inflated modeling contracts and those, what were they again? Ah, yes, those incredibly creative, exclusive fake brand partnerships you managed to concoct with a series of rather shady offshore entities. A rather ingenious, if legally dubious, method of funneling company money from one overleveraged Chen global pocket to another, all to keep the glittering illusion of your Midas touch alive just a little longer, wasn't it? The silence that descended upon Marcus Webb's office was absolute, heavier and more suffocating than any I had ever experienced. Even the perpetual hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to hold its breath. Victoria stood frozen, her face a mask of stunned disbelief, the vibrant color draining from her cheeks, leaving her looking suddenly small and fragile. Dad, for his part, looked like he'd been physically struck. He sagged slightly against the edge of Marcus's desk, his knuckles white where he gripped the polished wood. The carefully constructed edifice of their superiority, their invincibility, was visibly crumbling. I had not just hit a nerve, I had detonated a bomb beneath their feet. Marcus, who had been observing this exchange with the impassive focus of a seasoned chess master watching a critical gambit unfold, finally broke the silence. He cleared his throat softly, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the charged atmosphere. Indeed, he said, his gaze shifting from my father's stricken face to Victoria's stunned one, and then back to the documents before him. And on the matter of those financials and contributions. He slowly, deliberately, reached for another, even thicker stack of papers bound in unassuming gray cardboard, placing it squarely in the center of the desk. Your grandfather, Jonathan, was remarkably specific about the need for transparency, unwavering accountability, Richard. And most crucially, he paused, his eyes finding mine with a flicker of something that might have been approval, about verifiable, demonstrable business competence as a prerequisite for true stewardship of his legacy. These audited reports might prove illuminating for all parties. Marcus Webb, his expression carefully neutral yet underscored by a gravitas that filled the room, leaned forward, his fingertips resting lightly on the thick, gray-bound document he had placed between us. It felt less like a legal file and more like a dormant volcano, rumbling with the potential to reshape our entire world. The air crackled with unspoken accusations and the raw, bleeding edge of my revelations about Victoria's financial deceptions. Dad was still ashen, Victoria vibrating with a furious, impotent energy. "Richard, Victoria," Marcus began, his voice calm but resonant, a judicial scalpel cutting through the lingering shockwaves of my previous disclosure about the $50 million black hole. This situation, as Maya has so astutely begun to unveil, isn't merely about hidden operational losses or, let's call it creative accounting. This, and here his gaze sharpened, his eyes boring into my father's, then flicking to Victoria's, is about your father, Jonathan Chen's, ultimate and legally binding vision for the long-term stewardship and ethical leadership of Chen Global. It is a vision codified in this document, his final and absolute will, which, I must stress, supersedes all previous understandings, all familial assumptions, and certainly any informal plans you may have entertained regarding succession. He opened the document with slow deliberation to a page clearly marked with a faded silk bookmark, the heavy archival quality paper rustling softly. The scent of old ink and unwavering conviction seemed to emanate from its very fibers. Article 4, Section C, Paragraph 2, Marcus read, his voice devoid of inflection, each word landing with the precise weight of a judge's gavel. Upon my passing, or in the event of a declared and substantiated challenge to the current de facto leadership by a direct descendant who believes the company's core principles or financial stability are at risk, the entirety of my controlling shares in Chen Global, and thus the effective operational control of the company and its subsidiaries, shall not pass automatically by primogeniture, nor by any expressed or implied familial preference. Marcus paused, allowing the initial import of those words to settle like a layer of frost on the already chilled atmosphere. I could feel Victoria stiffen beside me, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Dad's knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of Marcus's mahogany desk. Instead, Marcus continued, his voice unwavering, said controlling shares and attendant leadership responsibilities shall be bequeathed in their entirety to the grandchild who demonstrates, through a standardized, rigorous, and impartially adjudicated business competency examination, the superior capability, demonstrable acumen, strategic foresight, and unwavering ethical grounding to lead Chen Global soundly and successfully into the future, preserving its integrity and ensuring its growth for generations to come. He looked up then, his gaze lingering first on my stunned and rapidly paling father, then on Victoria, whose carefully constructed composure was visibly shattering. In short, Richard, Marcus stated, his tone leaving no room for misinterpretation, your long-held assumption that Victoria was the de facto heir apparent, the one destined to take the reins? That assumption was, from a legal standpoint, entirely baseless. Jonathan, in his wisdom, left his empire not to the most favored nor the most visible, but to the most capable grandchild. His gaze flicked to me, a subtle but unmistakable acknowledgement. And that capability, Marcus added, a hint of iron entering his voice, is now, by the very terms of this will, to be formally and definitively proven. My own heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. Most capable, not most loved, not most popular, not the one who looked best in press photos. Most capable. It was as if Grandpa Chen had reached out from beyond the grave, his hand resting kati-bar on my shoulder, offering not just a chance, but a validation I'd craved my entire life. This is an absurdity, a cruel joke, Victoria finally choked out, her voice a strangled whisper that quickly escalated into a shriek. A competency test? What is this, some kind of medieval trial by ordeal? He wouldn't do that. Grandpa loved me. He always said I was his star. He loved you, yes, Victoria, Marcus conceded with a slight inclination of his head. But he loved Chen Global more. He saw it as his legacy, his life's work, not a bauble to be handed out as a party favor. And he was meticulous in ensuring its protection. Dad, finally recovering some semblance of his bluster, slammed a fist on the desk, making the crystal water carafe jump. Marcus, this is preposterous. I am his son. I am the current CEO. I decide who is fit for succession. This document, it must be challengeable. Undue influence, coercion, temporary insanity. Richard, Marcus replied, his voice dropping to a tone of icy calm that was far more intimidating than any shout. I personally oversaw the drafting and execution of this will. Jonathan was of perfectly sound mind, under no duress, and his instructions were crystal clear, repeated over several months, with multiple witnesses, including a sitting judge and a specialist in corporate governance. It is, I assure you, as legally impregnable as Fort Knox. To challenge it would be to invite public scandal, immense legal fees, and ultimately failure. He anticipated your potential objections, Richard. He anticipated everything. But a test? Victoria wailed, tears now streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Against her? She knows nothing. She's done nothing. This isn't fair. This isn't right. Fairness, Victoria, I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly strong and steady, is finally getting a chance to prove what I know, rather than being judged on what you assume I don't. Grandpa always said, the numbers don't lie, and neither does genuine competence. I'm ready to be tested on both. The words felt like a declaration of war, but also profoundly like coming home to myself. The weight of Marcus's words, of Grandpa Chen's undeniable posthumous decree, settled upon the room, heavy and irrevocable. The fight seemed to drain out of Dad, replaced by a weary, dawning horror. Victoria was still muttering about injustice, but her protests lacked their earlier conviction, sounding more like the desperate pleas of someone who knew, deep down, that the game had irrevocably changed. So what happens now? I asked Marcus, turning away from the spectacle of my disintegrating family. What are the next steps according to Grandpa's contingency plan? Marcus adjusted his spectacles, all business once more. Given that a formal challenge to the existing leadership assumption has now been effectively made by your claim, supported by your, shall we say, compelling preliminary evidence of potential fiscal mismanagement, he gave a subtle nod towards the papers I had brought detailing Victoria's creative accounting. The process outlined in Article 4, Section C, must commence with deliberate speed. The Board of Directors will need to be formally and confidentially apprised tomorrow morning of this governing codicil and its implications for succession. Which means they'll know Victoria was never the guaranteed heir, I murmured, a grim satisfaction settling in. Precisely, Marcus affirmed. They will also be informed that a competency examination will be scheduled. The will stipulates it should occur within 7 business days of the formal notification. Impartial arbiters, typically a panel of 3. 1 expert in corporate law and governance, 1 seasoned financial analyst or economist, and 1 respected industry leader from a non-competing sector. Their decision, based on a comprehensive assessment of financial strategy, market analysis, operational management, ethical decision-making, and crisis leadership, will be binding. A week, Victoria breathed, her voice laced with a new kind of panic. That's impossible. Is it, Victoria? I asked quietly. Or is it simply that you've never had to prove your worth beyond a charming smile and a well-rehearsed soundbite? Dad, his face a mottled canvas of fury, disbelief, and a dawning, terrible understanding, finally spoke again, his voice hoarse and grating. This is a catastrophe. A competency test broadcast to the board. Yeah, Marcus, you've been our family lawyer, my father's confidant for over 40 years. You can't possibly support this. This public circus, think of the company's stability, our stock price. My primary duty, Richard, as it was when I served your father, is to uphold the legally executed will of my client, Jonathan Chen, and by extension, to protect the long-term interests and integrity of Chen Global, Marcus stated coolly, unmoved. And this circus, as you so dismissively call it, is his design, not mine. He believed that true stability comes from competent leadership, not from maintaining a facade. As for the stock price, perhaps a demonstration of rigorous due diligence in selecting the next CEO will be seen as a strength. He turned to me. Are you prepared for the intensity of such an examination, Maya? It will not be a trivial affair. I am, I said, my voice clear and unwavering, the decades of silent observation and learning from my past life coalescing into a bedrock of certainty. I've been preparing for this my entire life. Both of them. Dad slammed his hand hard on the polished surface of the desk, his face contorted. Enough of this insanity. We are still a family, damn it. This is not over. We will discuss this further tonight, at dinner. He spat the words out, his eyes blazing with a desperate fury. 8 o'clock, our home, all of us. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command, an ultimatum laced with an unmistakable threat. Survive the legal battle, Maya, but let's see if you can survive your own family tonight. The unspoken challenge hung heavy and toxic in the sterile air of the law office. The legal framework was one thing, the intimate, brutal warfare of family was another entirely, and that battle was set to begin in mere hours. Walking out of Marcus Webb's imposing, granite-clad office building and into the fading afternoon light of the city felt like stepping from one carefully controlled pressurized chamber into the brief, deceptive calm before the next, more personal storm. The cool caress of the late spring air on my face did little to quell the adrenaline still thrumming through my veins or the turmoil churning within me. The old Maya, the one who had faded into an early grave in another timeline, would have been utterly terrified by now, already crumbling under the combined weight of Dad's explosive fury and Victoria's venomous despair. She would have been paralyzed by the thought of that looming family dinner, seeing it only as an arena for further humiliation and pain. She would have been desperately looking for a way to retreat, to apologize, to somehow make it all go away, even at the cost of her own soul. But the old Maya was a ghost, a faint, sorrowful whisper from a life I refused to allow to be repeated. I straightened my shoulders, the movement feeling less like a conscious effort and more like an inevitable alignment with a new, unshakable center of gravity that had formed within me. Decades. I possess decades of hard-won business knowledge, of first-hand observation of Chen Global's triumphs, and, more importantly, its slow, agonizing, and ultimately fatal decline in my previous life. I had seen their catastrophic mistakes unfold in real time, understood their ingrained blind spots, analyzed their doomed strategies from the helpless, silenced vantage point of an unheeded Cassandra. That knowledge, once a source of impotent frustration, wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was a formidable, highly polished weapon. And I was, at long last, ready and able to wield it with precision and purpose. My mind, freed from the shackles of fear and self-doubt, began to race, not with anxiety, but with cool, clear calculations. The competency test. I knew the probable areas it would cover, the types of scenarios it would present. Grandpa, for all his sternness and old-fashioned ways, had believed passionately in fundamentals. Financial modeling and stress testing, crisis management and communication, ethical leadership dilemmas, sustainable growth strategies versus short-term gains. I'd lived through the company's worst crises in my past life, the ones that had ultimately destroyed it. I knew the case studies intimately because I'd been one of their countless unacknowledged casualties. Victoria, with her superficial understanding, her reliance on charm, and her habit of delegating any task that required actual intellectual rigor, wouldn't stand a chance against genuine scrutiny. She might look the part, but she didn't have the substance. My first priority upon leaving Marcus: consolidate all the information and documentation he had provided. Cross-reference it with my own memories, the ghostly blueprints of past failures. Second, anticipate every dirty trick, every legal loophole, every underhanded tactic Dad and Victoria would inevitably try to pull before, during, and after that test. They wouldn't go down without a fight, and their fight would be anything but clean. And tonight's dinner? It wouldn't be a pleasant family meal, a chance for reconciliation. It would be a reconnaissance mission, a crucial opportunity to gauge their immediate strategy, to see how they intended to counterattack, to identify their weaknesses now that their primary weapon, my presumed incompetence and insignificance, had been neutralized. I wouldn't shrink. I wouldn't hide. I would face them, clear-eyed and resolute, because this time, I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance or a title. I was fighting for the future Grandpa Chen had so desperately tried to secure. A future I was finally strong enough, finally capable enough to claim and to build. The battle for Chen Global had just begun, and tonight the first skirmish would be fought across our family's dinner table. And I, for the first time in 2 lives, felt ready for it. The family dinner had been exactly what I'd anticipated: a tightly controlled performance of simmering resentments and barely veiled threats, with me as the unwelcome guest of honor at my own public dissection. Dad had been icily furious, Victoria a viper in silk, alternately spitting venom and feigning a tragic wronged innocence. They thought the primary battle would be fought in boardrooms, with lawyers and competency tests as the chosen weapons. They were woefully mistaken. The next front, my second major strike, opened in the hallowed mahogany-paneled sanctuary of Dad's private study later that same evening. He was hunched over his massive antique desk, his back to me, voice low and urgent as he spoke into his headset, no doubt strategizing with his own newly acquired and undoubtedly expensive legal team on how to discredit me. I didn't bother knocking. In my hands, I held a thick sheaf of glossy, impressively printed contracts. Victoria's supposed lucrative international modeling deals, the very ones she'd used for years to justify her exorbitant business expenses, and, more insidiously, to siphon company funds into her personal accounts. They were beautiful, elegant lies, meticulously documented. Evidence I'd painstakingly photographed, cross-referenced, and logged in the desperate, fading months of my previous life's bleak end. Without a single word, I walked directly over to his heavy-duty office shredder, a monstrous machine usually reserved for disposing of sensitive corporate documents. I began feeding Victoria's fabricated triumphs into its hungry maw. The machine whirred aggressively to life, its sharp teeth chewing up the elegant script, the embossed logos, the forged signatures, spitting them out as a cascade of meaningless, multicolored confetti that fluttered down to settle on the priceless, ancient Persian rug. Each shredded page felt like a small, satisfying piece of justice finally served. Dad ripped off his headset and spun around in his leather chair, his face contorting in disbelief, then quickly darkening into a thunderous rage as he took in the scene. Me, calmly destroying his precious Victoria's proof of her value. The air in the room crackled, suddenly thick and heavy with his fury. "Maya, what in the goddamned hell do you think you're doing?" His voice thundered, echoing off the book-lined walls, loud enough to rattle the decanters on the antique credenza. "Have you completely lost your mind? Those are important business documents. Victoria's contracts. Are you actively trying to sabotage this company? To sabotage your sister?" He surged to his feet, his imposing frame radiating menace, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, he looked like he might physically strike me, a line he'd never crossed before, not even in his worst tempers. The old Maya would have flinched, cowered, perhaps even burst into tears. The new Maya simply met his enraged glare with a cool, unwavering calm that seemed to momentarily wrong-foot him. This wasn't the daughter he knew how to intimidate. "On the contrary, Dad," I replied, my voice even and steady as I fed another one of Victoria's faked endorsements into the shredder. The machine let out a satisfying growl. "I'm merely cleaning house before tomorrow's crucial board meeting, getting rid of some of the more fragrant garbage that's been stinking up Chen Global's reputation, not to mention its balance sheets for far too long." I paused, meeting his furious gaze directly. Or perhaps, more accurately, I'm dismantling Victoria's carefully constructed facade, piece by piece, lie by lie. Someone has to, after all. You certainly haven't shown any inclination to do so. The shredder bit into a particularly ostentatious contract, one allegedly with a luxury Parisian fashion house that, in my previous life's research, I'd discovered had never even heard of Victoria Chen beyond her social media presence. The irony was almost delicious. "Consider it a form of proactive corporate hygiene," I added, offering him a small, chilling smile. "Wouldn't want any embarrassing discrepancies to surface during the board's due diligence, would we? Especially not with the new leadership vote pending." Dad's face was now a dangerous shade of puce, a vein throbbing visibly at his temple. "This is utterly absurd, preposterous," he sputtered, gesturing wildly at the growing pile of shredded paper at my feet. "You can't prove any of this wild, slanderous nonsense. These are legitimate business expenses. Victoria is a globally recognized brand ambassador. She works tirelessly for this company, for this family. These documents represent years of her hard work, her dedication." He strode towards me, snatching a contract from my hand just before it reached the shredder's teeth. This one, for instance, her campaign for Eclat de Lune perfume. It was featured in 3 international magazines. "Was it?" I asked mildly. "Or was Eclat de Lune, a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, with Victoria as the sole, secret beneficiary, and the campaign nothing more than a few cleverly photoshopped images that never saw the light of day beyond her own Instagram feed, all funded by an excessively generous marketing advance from Chen Global's European subsidiary?" He stared at the contract in his hand, then at me, his bravado faltering slightly in the face of my detailed specific knowledge. The fight wasn't going according to his script. "Actually, Dad," I continued, my voice still calm but now laced with an undeniable edge of cold, hard conviction, I can prove every last word, and I fully intend to. Those aren't legitimate expenses you're clinging to. They're meticulously documented payments to a series of shell corporations, all leading back to one person. I paused for effect. Your beloved Victoria. She's been systematically funneling company money, our family's money, Dad, the legacy Grandpa Chen entrusted to us, through her so-called exclusive modeling agency, an entity known as V Exclusives International. He scoffed, though it lacked its usual force. V Exclusives is a legitimate startup. Victoria is an entrepreneur. Is she? I countered. An agency with no other registered clients, no actual staff beyond a part-time virtual assistant, no physical office address beyond a P.O. box in Delaware, and a rather amateurish dummy website that was clearly built from a template last updated 3 years ago? Yet this agency has managed to invoice and be promptly paid by Chen Global for literally millions of dollars in vague promotional services, brand consultancy, and talent acquisition fees. Services that, by some miracle of invisibility, never actually materialized in any discernible way. I held up my phone. I have the encrypted transaction records, the incorporation papers for V Exclusives, copies of the wire transfers, even email chains where Victoria, using a pseudonym, instructs Chen Global's junior accounting staff you hired, Dad, to expedite these payments. It's all here. And Marcus has a forensic accountant currently verifying every single bite of it. Just then, Victoria herself appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices, her face a mask of wary inquiry. Her eyes widened in horror as she took in the scene, the pile of shredded contracts, my calm demeanor, Dad's apoplectic rage. What? What is going on in here? She demanded, her voice trembling slightly. Maya, what have you done? Before I could answer, Dad rounded on her. Your sister, he bit out, his voice thick with fury and a dawning terrible suspicion, is accusing you of embezzling millions from the company through your modeling agency. She's lying! Victoria shrieked, her carefully cultivated composure instantly shattering. She rushed towards Dad, her eyes blazing at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. That's insane. Dad, she's completely unhinged. She's having some kind of psychotic breakdown, don't you see? She's making all of this up, fabricating these wild stories to discredit me, to destroy my reputation before the competency test. Those contracts are legitimate. The agency is new. It's a boutique firm. Of course it's small. She's a jealous, bitter nobody, and she's trying to tear our family apart because she can't stand that I'm successful and she's... Nothing. Her voice cracked on the last word, a sob escaping her. It was a masterful performance of wounded outrage, one she'd perfected over years of manipulating our parents. Am I, Victoria? I asked, my voice dropping to a soft, almost gentle tone that seemed to silence her more effectively than any shout could have. The study fell into a sudden, suffocating stillness. Or am I just the one finally brave enough, or perhaps desperate enough, to air out all the toxic, corrosive secrets this family has been diligently choking on for decades? I let my gaze drift from her tear-streaked, furious face to my father's tormented one. Speaking of foundational truths and who truly belongs where, and what length some people will go to protect their position, I paused, letting the weight of my impending words gather like a storm cloud in the opulent room. There's one more, rather significant piece of information I've been holding on to. One that I believe puts your passionate, almost desperate claim to the Chen family legacy, and indeed, Dad's, rather fierce, almost irrational protection of you, Victoria, into a profoundly different and, I imagine, much more poignant light. Victoria stared at me, her eyes wide now, with a mixture of raw hatred and a dawning, terrible, unnameable fear. Dad looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole, to simply cease existing. The reason you bear so little physical resemblance to Grandpa Chen, Victoria, I continued, each word carefully chosen, precise as a surgeon's scalpel. The reason your features and temperament are so unlike anyone else in the Chen lineage isn't just some amusing quirk of recessive genetics, as Mom always liked to claim. It's because Richard Chen, I looked directly at my stunned and suddenly very, very still father, isn't your biological father. The silence that followed was absolute. a vacuum so profound it seemed to suck all the air, all the life, from the room. Victoria swayed on her feet, her hand flying to her throat as if to stop a scream from escaping. You, you monstrous, lying bitch! She finally shrieked, her voice cracking into a sound of pure animalistic agony. How dare you? How could you say something so vile, so disgusting? Dad! Tell her she's lying! Tell her it's not true! Make her take it back! Dad didn't speak. He couldn't. He just stared at me, his face a mask of utter devastation, a broken, hollowed-out man. The fight, the fury, the indignation, it all drained away, leaving behind something lost and terribly vulnerable. I truly wish it weren't true, Victoria, I said, and a strange, unexpected pang of something almost like pity echoed in my chest for a fleeting moment. Almost. For your sake, perhaps even for his. But the hospital records from St. Catherine's maternity wing, the discrepancies on your initial birth certificate application that I stumbled upon during my extensive research in the final desperate months of my previous life, they were quite clear. Anomalies I didn't understand back then, patterns I couldn't decipher, but which now make a terrible, tragic kind of sense. I took a steadying breath. And Marcus Webb, ever thorough, ever loyal to Grandpa Chen's oft-stated desire for unvarnished truth in all family and business matters, commissioned a discreet, legally admissible DNA comparison when I presented him with my initial findings. The results, I'm afraid, are conclusive. He has them safely locked away in his office vault, ready to be presented to the board if necessary. The great-grandfather clock in the hall outside the study chose that precise, devastating moment to chime, its deep, sonorous tones striking 12 times, each chime like a nail hammered into the coffin of the Chen family's carefully constructed lies. Midnight, the witching hour, the point of no return. Victoria stared at me, her face a ruin of tear-streaked makeup and shattered disbelief. Dad had sunk heavily into his chair, his head in his hands. The picture of a king whose empire had just crumbled to dust around him. The air was thick with the ghosts of unspoken betrayals, of lives built on deceptions now laid bare. "The clock is ticking," I said softly, the words almost lost in the profound silence that followed the final chime. In precisely 8 hours, the Chen Global Board doesn't just vote on a new CEO. They vote on the truth. They vote on the future. And this time, I met what I could see of Dad's bowed head, then Victoria's vacant stare. The outcome will not be determined by preference or by lies, but by capability, by integrity, and by the unassailable facts. The second strike had landed, and the fallout was catastrophic. The final battle, however, was yet to come. The Chen Industries boardroom, occupying the entire penthouse floor of our flagship skyscraper, was a cathedral of corporate power, designed to inspire awe and command respect. This morning, however, it felt more like an arena, the stage set for a gladiatorial contest. It was filled with an almost blindingly clear, unforgiving early sunlight streaming through the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating every polished surface, every nervous twitch, every carefully concealed expression. The long, gleaming mahogany conference table reflected the azure sky like a dark, still lake about to be violently disturbed. 12 board members, men and women whose collective decisions shaped the destiny of our billion-dollar global empire, were taking their seats, their movements stiff, their faces betraying a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and grim duty. Their usual hushed pre-meeting conversations ceased abruptly as I walked in with Marcus Webb at my side, a respectful but intensely curious silence falling over the room. My father, Richard Chen, and my sister Victoria were already present, seated at the opposite end of the massive table, attempting a united front of aggrieved indignation. Victoria, dressed in a severe but impeccably tailored power suit, looked unnaturally pale beneath her television-ready makeup, but her eyes burned with a feverish, defiant intensity. Dad just looked old, smaller, defeated before the main battle had even truly begun, the bluster of the previous night having evaporated into a heavy weariness. I took my designated seat, a place that technically hadn't existed for me until Grandpa Chen's true will had surfaced. Marcus sat beside me, his calm, resolute presence a reassuring anchor in the turbulent sea of unspoken accusations and palpable anticipation. The air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The chairman of the board, a portly, owl-eyed man named Arthur Kensington, cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are convened today under somewhat extraordinary circumstances, as per the legal notifications circulated by Mr. Marcus Webb, acting on behalf of Miss Maya Chen and the estate of the late Jonathan Chen. The agenda is twofold: to address serious allegations brought forward by Miss Maya Chen, and to subsequently determine the rightful succession of leadership for Chen Industries, in accordance with the explicit terms of Jonathan Chen's last will and testament. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Miss Victoria Chen, you have requested to make an opening statement. Victoria rose, her movements a little too sharp, a little too brittle. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, she began, her voice resonating with a practiced, if slightly strained confidence. Esteemed board members, colleagues, friends, before we descend into what I can only describe as a regrettably public and deeply painful family disagreement, I feel it is my solemn duty to inform you of certain disturbing truths. Her eyes, cold and hard, found mine across the table. My sister, Maya Chen, a person who has historically shown little to no interest in this company or its welfare, has recently, in what I can only surmise is a desperate and frankly pathological bid for attention and unearned power, embarked on a campaign of vicious, unfounded lies. Her intention, Victoria's voice quivered with artfully feigned emotion, is to destroy not only my reputation, but also the stability of this family, and by extension, the very foundations of this great company that our grandfather and father built. She is, to put it charitably, unwell, and her claims are the product of a troubled, vindictive mind. She sat down, a picture of wronged virtue, clearly expecting her performance to sway the room. I waited a beat, letting her accusations hang in the air, then rose slowly to my feet, feeling the weight of every gaze upon me. Mr. Chairman, board members, I began, my voice clear and steady, a stark contrast to Victoria's emotional theatrics. My sister is correct about one thing. This is indeed a painful family matter. However, she is gravely mistaken if she believes I have come here armed with lies. I met Victoria's furious glare directly. I have come armed with evidence, verifiable, documented facts. Facts that I believe will paint a very different picture of who has truly been undermining this family and this company. I turned to Marcus. Mr. Webb, if you would be so kind as to present the preliminary findings of the independent financial audit you commissioned on my behalf. Specifically, the audit pertaining to certain highly irregular expenditures and financial reporting practices within Chen Global over the past 3 fiscal years. Marcus, ever the consummate professional, rose. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, he said, his voice calm and authoritative. At Miss Maya Chen's request, and in accordance with the provisions of her grandfather's trust which allow for such scrutiny under specific circumstances, we engage the services of Deloitte and Touche, a firm of unquestionable international repute, to conduct an expedited but thorough forensic examination of certain financial activities. Their initial report was delivered to my office late last night. He opened a thick, spiral-bound dossier, the stark white pages filled with dense text and complex spreadsheets. The room held its breath. Marcus, his voice steady and devoid of any discernible emotion, began to lay out the damning findings, addressing the board directly, though his words were clearly aimed at Victoria, whose composure was beginning to fray around the edges. The independent audit, conducted with full access to Chen Global's financial records as mandated by the terms of Jonathan Chen's estate directives, has, unfortunately and rather disturbingly, uncovered a consistent, systematic, and significant pattern of misappropriation of company funds. These activities appear to be directly linked to Miss Victoria Chen's oversight of several marketing initiatives and so-called brand development ventures. He paused, allowing a ripple of shock and hushed, incredulous murmurs to travel around the polished table. Dad stared fixedly at his hands, clasped tightly before him. Specifically, ladies and gentlemen, Marcus continued, his tone becoming graver, over the last 3 complete fiscal years, a sum totaling approximately $52,374,000 has been diverted from Chen Global and its key international subsidiaries. These diversions occurred through a complex series of improperly documented invoices, grossly inflated expense reports, and substantial payments to non-existent service providers and shell corporations. Mr. Alastair Henderson, one of the oldest and most respected independent board members, a man known for his sharp intellect and unwavering ethical compass, leaned forward, his brow deeply furrowed. "Mr. Webb," he interjected, his voice raspy but firm, "are you unequivocally stating before this board that these findings point to deliberate, calculated embezzlement by a senior executive officer of this corporation?" "By Miss Victoria Chen, the chief marketing officer and, until very recently, the presumed heir apparent?" "The evidence contained within this report, Mr. Henderson," Marcus replied, his gaze unwavering as he met the older man's scrutiny, "points unequivocally to a series of deliberate and orchestrated actions, meticulously designed over a significant period to misappropriate company assets for personal enrichment. The paper trail, or rather, the digital trail in most instances, is extensive, unambiguous, and deeply concerning." Victoria shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. That's an outrageous lie. A complete and utter fabrication," she cried, her voice rising in a desperate, panicked crescendo. "This is absurd. I I don't even have that kind of direct access to capital movements of that magnitude. My role is in marketing strategy, in brand ambassadorship, not day-to-day financial operations. This is her doing." Her accusing finger stabbed across the table towards me. "She's planted this evidence. She's hacked into our systems. She's a pathological liar trying to frame me because she's jealous of everything I've achieved, everything I am." Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of support, any flicker of doubt in the faces of the board members. She found only stony expressions and narrowing eyes. Her carefully constructed world was visibly crumbling around her, and the desperation was making her reckless. "This audit is a sham, a witch hunt orchestrated by a nobody who wants to steal what's rightfully mine." "Access through traditional financial channels wasn't strictly necessary, was it, Victoria?" I stated calmly, my voice cutting through her tirade. "Not when you personally control the signatory authority for V Exclusives International, global brand Vanguard Solutions, and at least 3 other similarly opaque shell companies, all meticulously designed for the sole purpose of receiving substantial payments from Chen Global for services that were, curiously, never rendered." I gestured to Marcus, who nodded curtly and began distributing copies of a supplementary, even more damning, file to each board member. "As you will see, ladies and gentlemen," I continued, addressing the now utterly silent board, "we have provided copies of the incorporation documents for these entities, registered in notoriously lax offshore jurisdictions. We have also included layered bank records, obtained through entirely legal channels, I might add, which meticulously trace the siphoned funds directly from Chen Global accounts, through these intermediary shells and ultimately into personal investment portfolios and luxury asset acquisitions under Ms. Victoria Chen's sole, undisputed control. Here are the detailed statements for your perusal, clearly itemized." The rustle of paper was the only sound in the vast room as board members, their faces grim, began to examine the irrefutable evidence of Victoria's systematic plunder. The sheer audacity and scale of the embezzlement were breathtaking. Victoria sank back into her chair, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her eyes wide with a dawning, animalistic terror. The fight was draining out of her, replaced by the cold, hard reality of exposure. Victoria, despite the mountain of irrefutable financial evidence now physically present on the table before every board member, still seemed to believe, or perhaps desperately needed to believe, that she could somehow bluster her way out of the abyss. Her voice, though hoarse and trembling, rose again in a last, desperate crescendo of denials and incoherent accusations against me, against Marcus, against the auditors. Dad, his face a mask of profound paternal agony and dawning shame, made a weak gesture as if to intervene, to plead for some impossible leniency, some way to undo the devastation. It was then that Marcus Webb, with the impeccable timing of a seasoned courtroom dramatist who knows precisely when to deliver the coup de grace, decided to play the final, utterly devastating card. He reached slowly into his leather briefcase and produced a slim, sealed, official-looking envelope. And while we are on the subject of foundational truths, of legitimate claims to the Chen family legacy, and indeed, the very nature of the familial bonds that underpin such significant claims within the context of Jonathan Chen's explicit testamentary wishes, he said, his voice dropping slightly, yet carrying to every corner of the hushed room, drawing every eye to the unassuming white envelope now resting in his hand. He slid it slowly, deliberately, across the polished mahogany table towards Chairman Kensington. This document, Mr. Chairman, certified and notarized by an accredited laboratory, pertains to a matter of profound personal significance, yet one with undeniable and material implications for the Chen succession, particularly as outlined by Jonathan Chen's deeply held beliefs and stipulations regarding unblemished lineage for certain primary trust benefits and inheritance rights. It is a certified DNA analysis report. Victoria's face, already ashen, went completely, terrifyingly white, as if all the blood, all the life, had been instantly and violently drained from her body. She stared at the envelope as if it were a coiled, venomous serpent poised to strike. The full, horrifying implications of my words from the previous night, words she had perhaps dismissed in her arrogance as a desperate, empty bluff, now slammed into her with the undeniable force of a physical blow. The affair that had been a carefully guarded, corrosive secret for decades, the lie upon which her entire privileged life and her very claim to the Chen name had been fraudulently built, was about to be ruthlessly exposed to the cold, unforgiving light of this boardroom. Dad simply closed his eyes, a single betraying tear tracing a slow, painful path down his ravaged cheek. The meticulously constructed, decades-old illusion of the perfect, unblemished Chen family was shattering irrevocably before the assembled eyes of their corporate world. The chairman, Mr. Kensington, picked up the envelope with a somber expression, opened it, and read the single page within, his bushy eyebrows rising with each passing second. He then passed it silently to the board member on his left, and so it went around the table, each director reading its contents with a deepening expression of shock and grim understanding. The question of who inherits the Chen empire, as dictated by Jonathan Chen's will contingent, not only upon proven business capability, but also upon the fundamental truth of legitimate lineage for full inheritance, was finally and devastatingly answered. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Victoria's ragged, almost soundless sobs. She was broken, exposed, stripped bare of all her pretenses, all her lies. The great battle for Chen Global, the war for truth and succession, was, for all intents and purposes, over. I had won. But as I looked at the wreckage of my family across the table, there was no elation, only a profound and weary sadness. Victoria, however, was not entirely extinguished. As the board members began to murmur amongst themselves, their gazes shifting between the DNA report and me with a mixture of astonishment and a dawning respect, she leaned forward, her eyes now terrifyingly blank, save for two pinpricks of incandescent hatred fixing on mine. Her voice, when it came, was a barely audible whisper, a chilling promise that slithered across the vast table like a venomous snake. "You think you've won, Maya?" she breathed, a horrifying, almost feral smile twisting her lips. "You think this is over? This is only the beginning. I will make you pay for this. I will dedicate my entire life to destroying you, just like you've so gleefully destroyed me. This family, this company, it will all turn to ashes in your hands, you'll see." Her final whispered threat, more potent than any public outburst, planted a cold, sharp seed of unease deep within me, a chilling premonition of a war that, despite this victory, would likely span generations. The empire was mine. The peace, however, was nowhere in sight. Her whispered words, right there in the stunned, echoing silence of the boardroom after the DNA bombshell had detonated, were meant to be my private terror. "This isn't over, Maya. I'll destroy you like you destroyed me." Victoria's face, a pale, tear-streaked ruin of its former flawless beauty, was inches from mine, her eyes holding a terrifyingly vacant yet fiercely focused hatred. It wasn't a desperate outburst, it was a vow, etched in the acid of her utter public ruin, a promise delivered with the chilling conviction of a zealot. Even as Marcus patted my shoulder later, his own face grim with the understanding of Pyrrhic victories despite our comprehensive triumph, her insidious promise echoed in the chambers of my mind. She had nothing left to lose, no name, no fortune, no family ties left to honor. And that I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, made her infinitely more dangerous than she'd ever been when she wielded the Chen power and prestige as her personal playthings. The long, arduous war for the soul of Chen Global was finally won, the empire secured. But the deeply personal war against Victoria Chen, the looming specter of her relentless, lifelong vengeance, had just been formally, chillingly declared. 6 months later, the biting irony wasn't lost on me as the heavy wheels of the Chen Global Gulfstream G700 retracted smoothly into its gleaming belly, lifting me further from the earth, further from the smoldering wreckage of my former life and the family that had imploded. 30,000 feet above a sapphire blue Atlantic, the sky an impossible, brilliant azure canvas stretching to infinity, I put my signature, Maya J. Chen, chairwoman and CEO, on the final page of the Harrison Corporation merger agreement. It was a game-changing, legacy-defining deal, one that not only solidified our global market position, but also promised unprecedented growth and innovation, silencing the last of the industry doubters. "It's done, Marcus," I said into the encrypted satellite phone, the connection to my ever-present legal counsel on the ground remarkably crystal clear. "The Harrison deal is officially signed, sealed, and delivered. You can tell the team to pop the champagne. Or, knowing them, they probably already have." "Magnificent news, Maya. Truly magnificent." His voice, crackling slightly with the distance but warm with genuine, almost paternal pride, was a balm to my perpetually frayed nerves. "Your grandfather, Jonathan, would be bursting with pride today. You've not only stabilized Chen Global, in what can only be described as record time, Maya, you've skillfully navigated it through treacherous waters and set it on a bold new course to becoming the ethical, innovative titan he always dreamed it could and should be." He'd also probably tell me I look like I haven't slept properly in 6 months and that I desperately need a damn vacation. I chuckled wearily, rubbing my tired eyes as I gazed out at the curvature of the earth. A discreet flight attendant, anticipating my needs, appeared as if by magic, offering a small, exquisitely crafted birthday cake, a quiet, personal tradition I'd started for myself after taking the helm. My actual birthday, the one that had once been an annual testament to my invisibility within my own family, was now a quiet moment of personal triumph, often celebrated with a solitary slice of rich vanilla bean frosting at cruising altitude, a world away from their neglect. This particular cake, however, was for my 6-month anniversary as CEO. "This jet is a remarkable piece of engineering, Marcus," I added, appreciating the silent power that surrounded me. "But do remind me to schedule an actual day off sometime in the next fiscal year, perhaps even 2. "Duly noted and already tentatively penciled in, Madam CEO," he replied, a rare note of humor in his voice. "Enjoy your cake, Maya, and the view. You've more than earned every single crumb, every single mile." I had. But the sweetness was complex. Victoria's criminal trial for embezzlement and corporate fraud was slated to begin next week. The evidence Marcus and I had compiled was irrefutable. A conviction seemed almost certain. There was a grim justice in that, yet no real satisfaction. Only a weary sense of inevitability and the faint, lingering chill of her whispered threat. Dad, stripped of his authority and more painfully his illusions, was slowly, grudgingly learning to live on the comparatively modest but still generous allowance I now controlled, a complete reversal of our old dynamic. Our occasional conversations were brief, strained, and haunted by the ghosts of what might have been and the harsh reality of what now was. The vast Chen Empire, my grandfather's legacy, now belonged to its rightful and demonstrably capable heir. That much was true. But the family I had, perhaps naively, fought to somehow reclaim or at least find my place within, now lay in ruins around my feet, shattered by greed, deceit, and, finally, by the unsparing light of truth. Sometimes, I discovered, revenge, even when served justly, tastes almost exactly like birthday cake. Achingly sweet on the tongue, deeply satisfying on a primal, visceral level, and yet, in the quiet moments that followed, ultimately, undeniably hollow. They say blood is thicker than water. It's a comforting, time-honored adage, one that speaks to the supposedly unbreakable bonds of kinship, of unwavering family loyalty, of an intrinsic connection that transcends all other allegiances. It's a beautiful sentiment, really. But looking back at the scorched earth of the once proud Chen dynasty, at the intricate web of betrayals and lies that had defined us for generations, at the ease with which familial affection had been discarded in the pursuit of power and wealth, I'd learned a harder, colder, far more pragmatic truth. Blood might indeed be thick, yes, a viscous, often messy fluid. But money? Money, it turns out, flows thicker, faster, and with a far more ruthless, single-minded current than both blood and water combined. It carves its own relentless channels through the landscape of human affairs, reshapes loyalties, redefines relationships, and ultimately, it makes its own kind of family. A formidable, powerful syndicate forged not of love or shared history, but of ambition, mutual interest, and an unwavering servitude to its insatiable, ever-flowing, all-consuming power. And I, Maya Jianchen, was now its undisputed heiress, its chief navigator, its solitary queen, sailing a vast and opulent ocean of wealth, profoundly, starkly, and perhaps terrifyingly alone at the helm. The price of the empire was solitude, the cost of truth was peace, and the taste of victory was forevermore bittersweet.